by the oxidation of organic carbon. That's a fancy way of saying the burning of fossil fuels. This is the pattern that has been going on since 1950. Here we are in 2000, 2004. We are right around the point where you see those colors diverge. What those colors are future predictions of what will happen. Different colors are based on different models of slowing down the rate that we burn fossil fuels. And they show what concentrations will do. So for example, the greens and the blues and the reds show if we adopt certain behaviors to reduce the amount of hydrocarbons that we burn, fossil fuels we burn, this shows really what should happen by the time your great-grandchildren are around 2150, great-grandchildren. And we should stabilize somewhere around 550 parts per million. If you paid attention to the news, we crossed the 400 parts per million mark of global carbon dioxide this year. It's like last week. The black line is what happens if you don't do anything. If we say things like, oh, those scientists, they don't know, it's just a theory. I hear there's a lot of debate in the scientific community. There's none. There's none. There's zero debate. This is important. You're being told there's debate because people don't want to face some reality. They can't. There's no debate. This is not scientific theory, this is scientific fact. Atmosphere is getting increased in CO2 and it's getting warmer. If we get up to that point, 700 parts per million, that will be more carbon dioxide than we've had in the atmosphere since 26 million years ago. We will literally burn fossil fuels to take ourselves into past climates. So if we don't do anything, we get up to 700 parts per million. What does that mean? No ice in the northern hemisphere. No more glaciers. No more Greenland is covered with ice. No more North Pole covered with ice. No more Platte River ceases to exist. No more Denver, Colorado. Because the eastern flank of Colorado will become a desert. Because most of their water comes from snow melt, and there will be no snow. The Rockies will be snowless, 365 days a year. Now, does that mean it's the end of the world? Boom? No, not necessarily. These things are going to change, and we use the past to understand how things are going to change. So it's one of the things that we really do. This is why paleontology is important. So, this is why we look at the world of T-Rex, to see what a greenhouse world looks like. Does that mean we're going to have giant dinosaurs running around if we keep burning fossil fuel? No, it's not what it means. But does it mean that we're going to be able to tell how warm it will be in, say, Alaska if we keep burning fossil fuels? Yes. We'll be able to predict temperatures in places where you wouldn't think we would know. So that is the importance of T-Rex in a very large sense. It's actually reconstructing the past to figure out what's going to happen on in the future. So that's the kind of like, serious, important stuff about paleontology, but there's another thing that in my mind is just as important. Why do we care so much about T-Rex? Why do kids love T-Rex so much? Why do they love dinosaurs? How many people here used to be a kid? Okay, so this one's for the parents. This one is for parents. Why is T-Rex important in your life, other than the fact that your kid can rattle off the name of every dinosaur you've never heard of? It's because he used to be able to do it too. Skeletons that you see in museums are imagination generators. Watch kids in front of zoo. Immensity of it, the sign of it. We forget as we get older how our imaginations run as kids. Kids enjoy this way of God. Kids can stand in front of zoo and put meat on the bones. They can imagine that animal alive. They can reconstruct it in their minds. This is why skeletons in museums are so important. They get the brain working. Now, you can see Jurassic Park, and you can get one of 10,000 really bad dinosaur books, or watch really bad dinosaur specials where you have artist reconstruction of the dinosaurs or they do all this stuff. I think that stuff is actually kind of bad. Because it's shortcutting the need for kids to put meat on the bones. This is an argument I have in my museum a lot. Skeletons, when the kids look at Sue, and in their minds start to see Sue move, gets them thinking. Gets the brain working at a really important age. And it gets them interested in things like reading and going to museums. Is that the importance of T-Rex? You're sure right it is. T-Rex tells us about the past world so we can actually understand the future world. It tells us about the history of Earth. And it gets our children thinking, reading, going to museums, asking questions. Keeps their minds very sharp. So, please take your kids to museums. Bring your kids here. Come to my museum in Lincoln. Keep your kids going. Keep them looking at stuff like this. So, with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I would be very happy to take any questions. Yeah.
The idea that she may be a female is
Yeah.
based on size. Were the females bigger than the males?
Well, so this is a question. So when Sue was first found, they named her Sue because the woman who found her was Sue Anderson. But then there was this idea that, oh, maybe she's a girl. And yeah, because she's so big, and because they thought she was missing one of the bones in the tail. And it's an important bone for hooking up specific muscles that control specific gender-specific things. They thought she didn't have a particular muscle, so they figured, oh, she's a girl. The problem is we only have 54 specimens of T-Rex, and only 14 of them are pretty complete. So we don't have a sample size to tell by how big these animals were. So that's how we don't know whether T-Rex was a male or a female. But now I'm going to blow your mind a little bit. Because of the Museum of the Rockies, which is where they have more T-Rexes than anywhere else. How many people have ever heard of Jack Horner, the paleontologist? He's the consultant for Jurassic Park. So Jack is the ultimate field paleontologist. Just finds dinosaurs like that. And Jack loves to talk about dinosaurs, and then he keeps finding T-Rex, and he hates T-Rex. Which, by the way, if you ever saw the third Jurassic Park, is why the Spinosaurus killed T-Rex. That was Jack's decision. So Jack is interested in this cellular growth and metabolism, and he and his former student, Mary Schweitzer, were actually able to pull soft tissues out of some of the bones of T-Rex, 66 million-year-old soft tissues. And some of these soft tissues are actually gender-specific. So if you can get the soft tissues out, you might be able to tell. But from just size, we just don't have the sample size yet to know. Now, because T-Rex is closely related to birds, and in birds, generally what you see is that females are larger than males. Cowbirds are larger than male birds, and that's because female birds do all the important stuff, just like females everywhere, and male birds are basically good for making a lot of noise and being very flashy and being useless, just like males are. So, using that model, you could assume or guess that the bigger T-Rexes were females. We just don't have enough sample sizes to know. Any other questions? Yeah?
What is your theory of the T-Rex could have been warm-blooded because they have evolved into a warm-blooded bird, if you want to call it?
That is an excellent question. So the birds are warm-blooded like we are. So I've used that term cold-blooded and warm-blooded. I'm going to keep using it because it's just terrible. When you're warm-blooded, what's called endothermic, you control metabolically your body's temperature. We have a hypothalamus, the way you wear a hat when you're cold. And that's your little brain's thermometer. It's very good. It keeps your metabolic processes going, keeps you from getting too hot. You don't want to get a fever because you'll cook your brain. So we metabolically keep our furnace running at a fairly constant rate. We have to eat a lot. How many people here skip breakfast? I do too. How many people here haven't eaten this week? Okay, so I have a pet python at home. He eats twice a month. He's got a low metabolic rate. Crocodile's pretty low metabolic rate. Turtle's low metabolic rate. You can't go a month without eating. You just die. Because we have that fast furnace. We have to feed that furnace. Birds have an even higher metabolic rate than we do. Think about how much energy you burn if your daily activity, if you stop doing it for a minute, you plummet to your death. So birds have high metabolic rates. They're feeding that engine all the time. The question becomes, if birds are a type of dinosaur, when did that engine evolve? When did birds first become really warm-blooded? And so it started by people thinking about warm-blooded dinosaurs. It started by kind of contrasting what we know about their modern anatomy. You'll notice this T-Rex is on two legs, and it's kind of like this, it's balancing. In the old days, T-Rex looked like Godzilla, where it was upright, or they put them in swamps and all that. And so it's this contrast of this 19th century view with what we know about living animals. People go, oh my God, these animals must be warm-blooded. Well, we look at their tissues, and it's a mix. It's a mixed bag. T-Rex certainly has a higher metabolic rate than, say, an iguana or a snake, but it doesn't have the metabolic rate of living birds. And there isn't a point where they just go cold-blooded, 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 warm-blooded. They kind of go cold-blooded, a little less cold-blooded, higher, 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 higher than birds. Where that point is, whether T-Rex is truly warm-blooded or not, it's a mix. So our idea now is that its metabolism is unique to dinosaurs, and that really kind of figuring out whether it's more like a snake or a bird is hard to do. So that's kind of your non-answer. Yeah? Why did Tyrannosaurus Rex have such a big tail? That is a great question. So what do dinosaurs use their tails for? Well, I just pointed out, T-Rex is a biped. That means it just walks on its hind legs and its front legs are up like this. I am also a biped. I walk on my hind legs. Every time I walk, I'm doing a little balancing act. We are what I like to call terrible bipeds. So we walk on our hind legs, and we walk with our backs straight up above our hind legs. And we're constantly doing this, even though you don't realize it. You're constantly balancing yourself. By taking all of our body weight and sticking on our hind legs vertically, which is what we do, we have to really very precisely control our bodies, otherwise we fall over. And we have to do things like throw. How many people here have back pain? Okay? It's because we actually had to throw an S curve in our back. Instead of having a straight back, we have to curve our back to keep it from falling over. So T-Rex does not walk like I do. T-Rex walks with his body at an axis, at an angle like that to his legs. So he's got vertical legs, and his body's like that, like a T. Well, if you try and walk like this, you fall over. But if you had a big tail behind you, counterbalancing you, you could walk like that all the time. The tail is a counterbalance for these animals. In fact, there's a dinosaur called Allosaurus, and I love this story. At the University of Michigan, they have where I did my undergraduate, they have an Allosaurus mount from the 1950s, and it looks like Godzilla, standing like I am, with a tail dragging through. When they were first bringing it down, they had the legs set up, and then they're bringing the body down. And they just attached the body to the legs before they were going to rotate it into its Godzilla position. And one of the cables broke, and the body went on the legs and went, and perfectly balanced itself, which would be the correct life position. And they went, well, that's weird, and then put it like that. So that's why T-Rex had such a very big tail.
Didn't they have to break some of the vertebrae?
They absolutely, yeah, to get that Godzilla pose, they actually had to bust the vertebrae on the tail. So there's a question right up here. Yeah.
The exhibit here has fingers, looks like two fingers on the fossil. It looks like they're looking in the wrong direction. Is that, was there any use of those little arms? And is it an analogous structure to a bird that has that same two-finger structure?
Yeah, so we actually think that not necessarily the fingers, but the bones in the hand, the pattern of reduction and change in the bones in the hand in T-Rex and Deinonychus and Velociraptor, they share that with birds. Absolutely, you can see that pattern in dinosaurs. The way that dinosaurs held their hands, again, if you watch Jurassic Park, they're like this, doing that. Okay. So what we have awesome hands. We have like the best hands of any animal. And the reason is because we come from a line of animals that were arboreal climbers. But now we have these big hands, useful digits, and we can do things like this. Look at this. You pull out your hand and you go like that. This is called pronation. We've actually crossed the bones of our hand right here to fold our hand. This is called supination. And when you teach anatomy, you always remember it's like a whole soup. So we can do this, and we can do this. Dinosaurs with their forelimbs could not. The only position they could have their forelimbs in is like this. So what dinosaurs could do with their forelimbs is basically go. That's about it. None of this. None of that. So the correct pose for T-Rex's limbs, and I haven't looked at this zoom out, would be doing this. Just like that. Now, what did T-Rex use its limbs for? Oh, we have no idea. T-Rex is a really weird animal. The pattern of limb reduction that you see in T-Rex, where it has these little ridiculous tiny forelimbs, several other groups of bipedal dinosaurs do this. These animals, they weren't weight supporting, like T-Rex can do push-ups, couldn't even bring his claws to his mouth. Probably it was using it for pushing itself off in certain behaviors. It was, we know that these limbs are very strong. They've done muscle anatomy, they basically estimated the force of the limbs, and those two little arms could bench press something like 300 pounds. So they have huge muscle attachments on them. They're not just puny, people think of the puny little limbs of T-Rex are actually really little muscular things. But their size, we really don't know. We're very confused by it. The thing about dinosaurs is that they make no sense in a lot of ways. So, do you have another question? Or are you stretching? Anyone else?
How do you explain the T-Rex standing on both sides of a big body of water?
So I showed you that map with the ocean crossing. And that map is a coarse reconstruction, but that body of water called the Western Interior Seaway has a history of kind of going in and coming out. So sea level rises and falls, and right at the very end of the age of dinosaurs, it had actually drained down to where its northern edge was basically in South Dakota. So they would be able to move back and forth. Also, at most, the Western Interior Seaway is about 100 miles wide, so you could have all sorts of possibilities of island chains or land bridges. Actually, well, 200 or 300 miles. Yeah.
Do they think that, well, they laid eggs, right?
Yes.
So did they pair them like turtles in the sleep, or do they even know how they?
So that is a great question. All dinosaurs laid eggs. So there's what's called oviparity, which is where basically you lay eggs. And then there's what's called viviparity, which is also called live birth, which just like being cold-blooded is a terrible term, because any successful birth is a live birth. Eggs are alive, for crying out loud. So oviparity is basically you lay a hard-shelled egg. Viviparity is where you evolutionarily lost the egg, and you evolve a placenta like we have. And you maintain the little embryo inside the mother until either it reaches a point where it can crawl out and live on its own, or you like us, I mean, we're basically born kind of half-cooked. You know, we take a very long time relative to other animals. Or you get marsupial where the little embryo crawls out and basically grows into the mother's pouch. With dinosaurs, they all laid eggs. The crocodile, bird, dinosaur line, none of this so-called live birth. Now, you think all reptiles lay eggs. Actually, about 25% of lizards and snakes give live birth too, independently of all the placenta. The eggs, when you oviposit eggs, when you build a nest and you lay eggs, there are a couple of different strategies that parents do, or animals do. One is you lay a ton of eggs and you just take off. You basically lay a bunch of eggs and it's like, good luck. Some of you will make it, most of you won't. But I just lay a ton of eggs, like it's a numbers game. Or you lay a few eggs and you take really good care of them. So a lot of birds will actually take good care of their eggs. Some birds will be like, see you. A lot of reptiles will actually take better care of their eggs than you think. Like crocodiles and alligators actually take very good care of their eggs. And some reptiles just take off, lay the eggs and leave. With dinosaurs, we actually have preserved nest structure. And so we know that eggs are actually laid in a fairly careful pattern, very similar to a lot of birds. We know that some nests were made of vegetation, like alligators. Some nests, we know, actually the mother sat on top of them and incubated them. And then some nests were basically just like other like reptiles, just lay a bunch of eggs and take off. So big sauropods with a long neck, some of them were just like, I mean, literally these animals would just walk across the landscape just laying eggs, just constantly. Just boom, 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 boom. If you've ever heard of an animal called oviraptor from the famous Gobi Desert expedition, certainly your kids have. Oviraptor means egg plunderer, nasty, nasty oviraptor, because it was found near the nests of a very nice dinosaur called Protoceratops. We go to Protoceratops, lays these eggs, and the nasty oviraptor comes and takes the eggs. That's from the 1920s American Museum expedition in Mongolia. And in fact, what was discovered in the 1990s, that actually nasty, nasty oviraptor was actually a very nice mother, because it turns out when they finally found an egg with an embryo in it, those were oviraptor babies, not Protoceratops. And we actually have specimens of oviraptor where the mother is actually sitting on the nest. So we know that they were taking some good care. At least some dinosaurs were actually investing, parental investment in the eggs, at least at the point of hatching. With sauropods, we know that their herds had multiple age classes in them, so the babies were hanging around with the adults. And that's kind of as good as it is for what we know about their reproduction. Yeah?
The number of eggs that they laid determine whether or not they were internally fertilized or externally.
They're internally fertilized. All internal fertilization occurs basically in the entire reptile group and the entire animal. So we lose external fertilization in land animals at roughly the point frogs and salamanders. They're the last ones to do it.
How about one more question before we move on? It's
Okay.
Time's up, so.
Yes.
The center of this country where the grass is, where the ocean used to be.
Yep.
When did that part of the country raise up, and what caused it to raise up so that it doesn't flood again?
That's a great question. So, but how is it that we've raised up so that we don't flood again? Well, our elevation hasn't changed dramatically, at least in Nebraska. There's been a little uplift as the Rocky Mountains have come up. They've basically, the eastern end of the state, or the western end of the state is kind of tilted up a little bit. But really the reason that the sea levels dropped to the point where they're not on top of us now is two things. One, now we have poles that are covered in ice. And that's where a lot of the volume of Earth's water is. It's locked up in polar ice. This is why things like global warming is a non-trivial issue. I made fun of Florida that it's going to go away. It's going to go away. But that's just going to happen. And we can build as many levees as we want, but eventually. So where we are, we're in pretty good shape in terms of losing polar ice, though. And the reason is because sea levels were so high at that point in time because of the movement of continents. And this is, some of you may have heard of this, plate tectonics. This is how the surface of the planet is formed. The continental crust breaks apart, and when, just like having a bad paper cut, when you have a paper cut, blood comes out and forms a scab. When continents move apart, magma comes up to the surface, forms crust, forms oceanic crust. And that's what underlies all of our ocean basins. There's a reason Africa and South America look like they would fit together like a puzzle, because they used to. But as they separated, they formed an ocean basin between them. And water was in that ocean basin, because water goes from high to low places. Now, the thing is that if you move these continents apart very fast, they generate a lot of oceanic crust very quickly. And oceanic crust, when it first forms, this is going to be a weird analogy, but think about hot, fresh bread, how it rises. It's very fluffy and buoyant. That oceanic crust is very fluffy and buoyant, and that means that the ocean basins are actually elevated up. They're up, up, up. And as a result, they literally push water onto the continents. So part of the reason that the Earth looks so flooded at that time is because of the rate of continental motion and the formation of ocean basins. Now, that has slowed down. We're in a pretty slow time right now for continental drift, which is, that's okay for us, because continental drift does things like floods continents, creates giant volcano mouth belts and things like that. So we don't really have to worry too much about being flooded because of that. We will not be, for example, if we melted all the ice on the planet, we would not have an ocean running through us again. We're good. Nebraska's just fine if we lose ice. In terms of being flooded, we're in big trouble when it comes to actually getting water. But what we see in the Cretaceous is a product really of larger issues, plate tectonics. That's why there's that difference. But in terms of elevation, we're not thousands of feet higher than we used to be. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming.